Clap once. Clap twice. 3 times. That works.
Every
Jeff just suggested that. He said, all right, here, try this out. It works from kindergarten up to as far as you can go, and he was 100% right.
Yeah.
Welcome back. I hope you had some great sessions in the breakouts and learned a ton of new things that you can apply. Before we kick off the next session, I'm actually going to do a little bit of a Cinderella episode here. Of course, you know the does the slipper fit? We've encountered what seems to be a diamond stud earring that's missing an ear and a match.
Well, that's mine.
If nobody claims it, Jeff will end up with it. So please see one of us in the organizing committee if it's yours or if you know who it belongs to. It's my great pleasure to introduce this next panel. They are smart, funny, intelligent, caring people. And Jeff Sinclair is going to lead this panel. Jeff is a former senior partner at McKinsey & Company with a long and distinguished career. He's an entrepreneur, he's an investor, and he's a faculty member here at Ross. And he will be leading this panel. And without further ado, I introduce you and the panelists. Take it away, Jeff. Thank you.
Stuart. I would actually, to challenge one word, which is lead this panel. I will say, having met briefly a couple times in preparation, this is going to be a bit like herding cats. This is a very vocal group of entrepreneurial leaders here, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Rather than me introduce them and give you some dry academic set of credentials and things like that, we thought it'd be more interesting to have them introduce themselves. So let's start with Ellen Havdala. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? She's going to kind of say where she comes from, you know, why she became an entrepreneur, why she thinks the whole notion of valuing culture in organizations is important, and maybe a fun fact or two. If she sticks to the script, in which case, I'll be really surprised.
First of all, thank you all very much for the privilege of getting to speak to you all, so I appreciate that greatly. My name's Ellen Havdala. I've worked for Sam Zell for 28 years. Through the 28 years, I've had a couple of different jobs. The first 20-some-odd years, I was mostly on the investment team, ultimately becoming a senior transaction person, leading deals, sitting on boards. I have 2 times where I think my entrepreneurial spirit kicked in. And interestingly, they tie into the second point that Jeff wants us to talk about, which is when I saw the light on valuing culture. The first time was when we bought Schwinn, the bike company, out of bankruptcy in 1992. I actually was a part of the investment team, dropped down, and became one of the senior managers to help lead the turnaround of Schwinn. And we needed to revitalize the place because as it slid into bankruptcy, really the corporate culture had gotten a little bit stale. So we picked up the company from Chicago and moved it to Boulder, Colorado, and literally hired several hundred people and created a brand new culture. And what occurred to us when we were doing that was how critical it was to make sure that you didn't just hire smart and talented people, but that you hired smart and talented people who actually cared about the people they were sitting around, and that they would value and really support the people they were working with. So ultimately, we created an unbelievable company because they were all so supportive and because they actually helped one another, and it really became a tremendous organization. The second time that I saw the light on valuing culture and became an entrepreneur, or at least did a full tack in my career, is 7 years ago. I was going to retire, and I went into Sam and said, I'm retiring and I'm going to go to divinity school to study theology. And thankfully, Sam said, all right, well, go to divinity school, but don't retire, and we'll figure out what you're going to do here. And that's exactly what we did. So I no longer am an investor. What I do is I now go around and I meet people to come and invest in our deals or to show us new transactions. And I also help get to oversee the 3 entrepreneur programs that Sam has established, the oldest of which is the Zell-Lurie Institute here at Michigan. And boy, going to divinity school teaches you all about culture and all about people. I was absolutely the only capitalist, in divinity school. And I will tell you that there were moments where it was actually relatively uncomfortable. To the point where when I took my second or third pastoral care class, we had to give a seminar. I had to lead a 3-hour seminar, and I finally said, you know what, to heck with this. My seminar was called Pastoral Care to the Wealthy. The rich are people too. It's actually God's honest truth. I can send it to you if you need to. Anyway, so fun fact or two, I would just say be careful how you introduce yourself. For a very long time, I referred to myself as a spinster because I'm middle-aged, I'm single, and I live with a cat. And then 6 months ago, actually picked up spinning yarn because I was knitting and weaving, and I figured, so people are now really using that. But a flip side, I actually like to hang on to my former type A self. I still heli ski 2 to 3 weeks a year, so try to hang on to both. Anyway.
So my daughter is a brand manager in the cat food business at Mars, so I think having a cat lady on the panel is a perfectly good thing to do, because I have a cat lady in my family.
Nice.
Our next panelist is Gregg Latterman, and he actually teaches at some school called Kellogg in Chicago, but I'll let him introduce himself.
So I'll start with, when did I see the light on valuing culture? When I graduated from college, I worked at one of the biggest CPA firms in the country, and I'd say the first week of that job, I decided I never wanted to be in that culture again. I apologize if anyone here works for a CPA firm, but it didn't fit me and my lifestyle, how I wanted to be as a person. So I actually decided immediately, once I was inside a bigger company working for other people, that I never wanted to work for someone again. Didn't want to have to wear a suit ever again, and be told when I had to work and when I didn't have to work. So I actually created a record label while I was working for 2 years. I did 2 years there, and when I finished my 2 years, I put out a compilation of the best unsigned bands in the United States, and from that turned it into a 20-year business called Aware Records that had joint venture with Columbia Records and signed some of the biggest bands in the world, did really well.
Can you drop a name or two so they understand how big they are?
The biggest band I signed were like Train, John Mayer, Five for Fighting.
Those guys, yeah.
And then I managed The Fray, Michelle Branch, tons and tons of bands. And then had a midlife crisis and decided that I didn't want to do that anymore. So I went back and got a master's at Penn in positive psychology a couple years ago, and have turned that into teaching at Kellogg and helping run Zell fellows at Kellogg at Northwestern as well. Fun fact or two, the fun facts, I just kind of put them into that. So I used to be able to jump about 100 feet on water skis.
Wow.
Not anymore.
How do you follow that?
I don't know.
So our third panelist is, she's actually got a background, it says blue-orange in your program, but she'll tell you that she's is doing some things that are just amazing, including that, but also well beyond. So Blair Miller.
Thank you. So I guess the first question around, I'll answer the entrepreneurship question. I think the first experience for that with me was when I graduated from college, and experience with entrepreneurship is understanding failure and learning through ambiguity. So when I was in college, I applied for Teach for America, of which I thought I was going to get offered to Teach for America, and I was rejected and had zero backup plan. So I Googled Teach Abroad, and some woman said, "Do you speak English? Would you like to come to South Korea and teach English?" So I decided that's what I would do. A month later, I was sitting in the airport, and no one was there to pick me up, and I was terrified and had no idea what to do. And sat there for about 3 hours. They shut off the lights to the airport, and I'm sitting outside the airport, and there's this monk in these beautiful orange robes. I'm like, well, he'll surely save me if something goes down here. And then he left. Anyways, this sort of white van pulls up, and they 3 Korean men were like, Blair? And I was like, yeah? And so I just got in the van. Anyways, I spent a year and a half. I figured they knew my name, so it would be okay. So I spent a year and a half teaching English in South Korea, but more importantly, that experience kind of gave me this ability to try new things, to lean into discomfort, and develop sort of the courage to go on alternative career paths, which I was told when I got my MBA at Ross that I was in the alternative career, which meant anything that wasn't banking or consulting. And so I was like, could have gone into the arts, I could have gone into what I did, but ended up have spent the last 10, 11 years focused on socially responsible investing, which is how do we really think differently about how we value companies. And to the culture point, it's integral to any business that we look at. Culture is embedded in the core principles of responsible investing, which is the social aspect of it, the governance aspect, and the environmental aspect. So how we think about culture is integral, and we can talk more about those later. I feel like Korea was kind of my fun fact.
It's
right
pretty
now.
fun. You got in a random van
stop
with
there.
some complete strangers in South Korea.
I'll stop there then.
So, as you can see, we have a pretty interesting and wide range of experiences on the panel. So thank you all for being here. It's fantastic. We're definitely going to touch on the topic of this thing called valuing culture in organizations. But what I thought would be interesting to do is to start, there's 3 words starting with P behind me. Start with the third one, which is performance. Because we can create a wonderful culture, but if we don't create a culture that actually performs, then having it wonderful isn't necessarily as wonderful as it needs to be. And so I thought it'd be interesting to start with how each of our panel members thinks about company performance, and then we'll segue from that into the topic of building a positive and productive culture. So with no particular order in mind, other than I'll go in reverse order from what I went before. Blair, you want to start us off by how you think about company performance?
Sure. So as a social responsible, or the term now is sort of impact investor, we look at, I put it in 2 frames. One is companies that have profit, purpose, synergy or alignment, and companies that have profit, purpose, tension. And profit, purpose, alignment are companies that are furthering their bottom line, and that furthering of their bottom line is integral to their social impact. Profit, purpose, tension is companies that are building companies but may not be serving a social bottom line, and then have a CSR or corporate social responsibility program on the side, but that's only funded if the company is successful. So the way that we look at performance is, if you're looking at the synergy, you look at, of course, the financials. You want your company that you're investing in to be successful on all of the important financial metrics. But on the social side, there's 3 ways you can look at it. The first is to do sort of negative screens, is what it's called in the industry, which is basically say, do no evil. So don't invest in companies that are, you could say, tobacco companies or oil and gas companies. The second, which I alluded to earlier, are the environmental, social, and governance screens, which are called ESG screens, which look at the environmental impact, the social impact, which could be supply chains, culture, and how you treat your people, and performance, and then also governance, how you build your management. And then the third way we think about different types of companies in that space is also like proactive social impact. You could have the negative screens and also have good governance and social and environmental impact. But are there companies that are proactively having impact? And those are companies, particularly clean energy is a great example, where you have a company that is successful financially, but the more they grow as a company, the more the cleaner the energy will become, but of course the more renewable energy will provide in the world. So we kind of look at this double bottom line of performance that is a bit of a different take on how we think about investing.
So how do you think about them together as opposed to apart? So I mean, is the for-profit side of the business subsidizing the socially responsible side of the business, or there's the hackneyed impression of do good by being good kind of thing? How do you think about that as you're thinking about your investments?
Yeah, the space is complicated because there are a lot of different types of investors, and I always use the example, there's a large space between negative 100%, which is charity, let alone positive 20%, which I guess in a good market could be venture capital. And if you think about the 0, which is, you're sort of just even between 20%, there's a lot of different ways. Some companies will say some investors will say we prioritize social impact, and sometimes prioritizing social impact means that we won't get the financial returns that we need.
So like Timberland shoes consciously takes a lower return on invested capital because they want to produce their shoes in a socially responsible way.
Exactly.
As an example.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then there are other investors where you will say that synergy has to happen, that we have to meet the highest financial performance and also have the social impact. I mean, Patagonia is an interesting example of that. They've chosen to remain a private company. Patagonia has a huge commitment to environmental sustainability. They've committed to using organic cotton in almost all of their products. They've chosen to remain a private business because when you're a public company, it's harder to maintain control of
Their founder says, don't buy our products, use the coach you already have.
Exactly.
Right.
Bernard does.
Exactly.
So it's like, it's hard to say we want to be
Exactly.
public when your founder says that.
Exactly. So those types of companies are really, pushing the envelope on we can have a strong company with the right type of growth, but also achieve the social impact that we want to see.
So do you think private equity, venture and private equity is a better way to think about investing in the kind of companies you're talking about versus publicly traded companies? Can publicly traded companies do what you're talking about?
Well, Unilever is an interesting example. I don't know if you have followed Unilever. Paul Pullman, who's the CEO of Unilever, basically announced, I think it was a couple years ago, that he was going to only report on an annual basis because he was saying the only way Unilever can really have the sustainability impact that we want to have, I could not be reporting on a quarterly basis because we have to look at a long-term perspective. The other thing Unilever is doing is, they're saying there's something called a benefit corporation, which is essentially, it's a sort of standard of looking at the environmental, social, and governance screens of a company. And so he's looking at doing that across all of his business units at Unilever. So that's an example of a public company that is taking a stand. It's more challenging because they are valued by the market at such a consistent pace, and the market, unfortunately, currently is not valuing social value in the way that I wish it would at some point in our lifetimes. Whereas a private company, you have more flexibility. Although venture is hard because you have to grow very quickly.
Right.
So
I'll take you off the hot seat. Greg, how do you think about company performance?
I'm going to talk about the more of an entrepreneurship mindset of this, and I'm dealing with people that are starting their company. I'm actually starting with my founder a pretzel company. I do a lot of angel investing. I actually care about passion and purpose, not performance. Hopefully, at some point, if there gets traction, there's performance and you get a return on your investment. But to me, for an early stage company, performance is just actually moving forward every day and getting better traction in the market and staying alive.
But that's okay. Maybe your metric is the number of customers we have that are sampling our products.
It's got to go up.
It's
every
got to
day.
grow, right? I mean, monthly active users in a tech startup, right?
Anything that's showing us positive momentum. So I care more about in the early days if I'm going to invest or if I'm going to mentor or if I'm going to build a company. It's like what's underneath it. Because how bad does the founder want this, and how are they going to build this company? What's the real underlying purpose? And I mean, I was just on the phone before we started here with someone that I put money in 3 years ago. It's now a different company. Now the company's going to go. And I invested in that person 100%. And now it's going to happen. And he kept momentum enough and figured out a way to bootstrap to keep it alive when his other idea died. And now it's the second one that's going to happen. So I can't worry about his performance short term.
Short term, but eventually I assume you'd like to get a return on invested capital.
Of course, hopefully, but some of them aren't going to work. But I don't focus on the performance because it wouldn't work.
Mm-hmm.
More the
short term.
The inputs that might ultimately lead to the outputs.
Yep. Like I said, especially when you're talking about early stage people, you have to look at what's their purpose. What are they really? Why are they here? How bad will they? What will they do to make this thing happen?
So can you bring that alive and talk about the passion for pretzels?
Sure.
I mean, I'm serious. I
love pretzels.
I love pretzels too. They're non-fat for a fat guy.
We'll get a shill for our company that we're about to launch.
Right.
Yeah, it's called Positive Pretzels, and it's my whole gist of it is I think pretzels need to be reinvented because they're the same product that's been out for 70, 80 years, and it's a great product that it's not the healthiest, but it's not the unhealthiest, and so we're going to make it with better, cleaner ingredients so you can feel better about what you eat, and it'll still taste great, or hopefully taste better, and you'll feel better about what you eat, and it's really just it's easy to give it to people, and we'll put more protein in it, so.
We're going to come back to that when we get to culture, because I bet tying people back to that passion is something that would be pretty interesting.
But we're obsessed with pretzels, and that's why we're doing it.
Obsessed with pretzels. I mean, everybody's got to be obsessed with something. Pretzels is probably better than some things that other people are obsessed
And
with.
potato chips.
And potato chips, right. Ellen, how about you? How do you think about company performance?
Wow, I feel like I'm back in divinity school again. We're capitalists. It's just, I work for Sam Zell, and, our job is to invest and make money. And so we actually look on total return to shareholders because if we put, say, $2 million to work and we get a 20% IRR, that's great. But the absolute dollars coming back to us, it's not significant enough relative to the total portfolio. But the flip side of that is that we actually believe that as human beings, we have responsibilities to one another. So what we do is, we believe that charity comes from the people, not from the corporations. And do no harm, absolutely. And I have personal things like, if we ever went to a tobacco company or rifle company, I'd be screaming and yelling to not do it, although none of my colleagues want to do it either. But we think that charity is not necessarily a corporate responsibility. It's when you make money, then that is an obligation, to you as a human being. So we actually focus on the traditional total return to shareholders, return on invested capital, top and bottom line growth. All the things that you outline here, Jeff. I'd say the other thing that we think about, though, when we think about performance is in Sam's book. Sam wrote a book that came out about a year ago. He talks about one of the things that makes him happiest now is when we've done well on investment is not just that he's done well, but that all of our colleagues have done well. And he talks about basically like how many people like he's created, real, financial comfort for. And, I think that's part of our responsibility, to one another as well.
Yeah.
Great. In the context of company performance, and so this may be redundant, so if there isn't a whole lot to add, we can move on, but how do you then, when you're sitting with your CEO, couple of the presentations earlier today talked about performance, discussions. How do you actually work with the CEO and that top team to create that accountability for the performance that you are looking for? And how do you think about the attraction, the development, the excitement, the retention and engagement of that top team to make sure that how you're thinking about performance is actually being manifested in the leadership of the company that you're dealing with? Who'd like to start?
I'll dive in and then
Go ahead.
make it short.
Yeah, go ahead.
So basically, we only invest in companies whose management teams we really like and think will do a good job. So
that's an investment criterion for you.
Absolutely.
Right off the bat. You don't go in, buy the company, and then replace that team.
If we did, then we did something wrong.
Got it. Okay.
We are big believers that a good management team can run almost any company, and a bad management team can ruin a fabulous company pretty quickly. So we invest with people that are like-minded, and then we're very active investors. Even if we have a minority position in a company, they know that we're going to be calling them on a weekly or every other week basis to talk about what they're doing, and it's not to hound them, but it's to support them because we've work with so many companies, we feel like we have a lot of skills and a lot of ways to help them do their job better. And most of our management teams really come to rely on us, to come to us and say, here's what I'm doing, how would you guys think about it? So it's very collaborative, it works really well, and frankly, if it's not, then chances are that the investment probably shouldn't have been made in the first place.
So when do you start working on that alignment between your view of performance?
The day we meet them, particularly when I was an investor, and even now when I'm talking to companies about, even if I'm not going to do the transaction, I might meet a company and then say, yeah, we should talk to you further and then hand it off. I am letting them know day one how active we're going to be, that we're going to be, board members, we're going to be supportive of them, but the support also means that they've got to be very upfront with us, very transparent with us. Sam's big buzzword is transparency. If you tell us what's going on, we can help you fix any problem. If you hide it from us and let it fester, we may not be able to, help you in time. And, frankly, we've been really lucky that our management teams have trusted us and we've trusted them, and it's worked out really, really nicely.
So now, following up on Divinity School, do you do the Blues Brothers thing and say we're on a mission from God?
No, I don't actually.
Sorry, that's dating me. For those of you that know the Blues,
well, and it's
the Blues
Chicago-based
Brothers movie.
too, right?
It is.
Yeah,
it is.
so it's appropriate, but I'm going to use that in my next one. So Scott, when you come to my next thing, you'll see that get incorporated.
And Joliet Prison and the whole bit, but we don't have,
I
we don't
prefer
have to
not
go
to
into
go to the
movie.
Joliet prison. So,
Got it,
yeah,
okay.
Thank you.
Either Blair or Gregg.
I don't have as much corporate, so go for it.
Well, very similar. When you're making an investment, you're investing in the management team from day one, and if they, that's pretty much the number one criteria. The only thing I would say is from this panel point of view of culture, I mean, it's very, for socially responsible investors, one of the most important things, we made some investments at a firm I used to be at where you liked the management team, but they didn't have the ethos of the social aspect, and we sort of invested hoping they would move this product downstream, for example, and it just didn't happen because it's very rare that you have so much pressure from investors who are looking for financial, returns, that if you don't have that core management team that is literally doing this for, of course, to build a business, but a business that is going to help achieve a social impact, it's very difficult to get them to shift later on. So that's like a really important point. And then secondly, on the performance, when the company, the hardest part is when they're growing, like this, there's a small team, and then I think that when the Series A investment and Series B, like how do they build their team? And often culture is like shoved to the bottom because they're so worried about hiring the right people and growing so quickly that I think that's a place where investors can be very helpful. Like, how do you think about the org chart? How do you think about what roles people play as you have to start taking specific roles versus everyone doing everything? And I think that's like an important part of maintaining that culture as you grow. And I think as investors, they're often not thinking about it because they're trying to grow so fast that you can be helpful.
And that's why the founder or CEO is so important, because as you're building and growing, it's up until a certain point, say 50, 60 employees. That's the founder CEO is so important in who they hire, how they hire, making sure that all the, the purpose and the mission and values align with really everyone they're bringing in that early, because everything has an impact.
Yep.
And how do you think about that individual leader versus the team at the top? And do they all have the same kind of metrics and expectations? Do you think about a team performance? Do you think about individual performance? How do you strike the balance?
I mean, you have to have both.
Right.
So it depends on the industry and the company of how you're going to have performance indicators on that. But at the end of the day, I think the biggest part of it, whether it's 50 people or it's Unilever, is people that work for you feel like they actually have a say in what they do. I think in however you can make that happen, and that happens both with them being rewarded individually and as how the company does.
So I think it's interesting. We've got a lot of alignment across the three of you, but we've got one, total return to shareholders, financial metrics. We've got one that's more about the input metrics early on because of early stage investment. We're looking for the purpose and the passion that we hope are going to lead to it. And we've got one that's the blend of social impact and sustainable economic performance. So there's variations on a theme, but you've all got that as a guiding kind of view of how you need to think about things. So your company has to perform according to your definition of performance. So now let's shift to the topic of the workshop here, which is, what are the characteristics of a great company culture? What is it that makes a company, fit what your vision is in terms of how you're trying to create the organizational culture that'll lead to the performance you're seeking, versus maybe some things that aren't so great? Who'd like to start? I mean, and by the way, we can have controversy and you can debate with
yeah,
each other.
we should. I mean, I'll throw out Whole Foods that was a public. Yeah, was their prices are cheaper now. Was a public company. John Mackey would say things like, "Don't buy our stock if you're like, if you don't like how I'm gonna overpay our employees." I mean, it was really a place where you could make it if you were the manager in a store, if you were just a normal employee working, the pizza oven, you actually could make a difference. Someone could walk into the store and say, "I have a product, what do you think?" And that anyone at that store could actually be a leader and step up and possibly get into that store, which then could grow to the rest of the place. And that's how they built their company. Now they've been acquired by Amazon because they couldn't compete on share price based on what they were trying to do. Kind of coming back to where we started. So I asked the question, can you do all the right things as a public company today? Is it physically possible? We'll see with Unilever in 5 years. And the best CEOs and the best companies and the best leaders understand that long term, it can't just be about the profit. It's got to be more about the stakeholders. And if you get too unbalanced, and I think that's what Whole Foods has done a good job with, that for the most part, you can create long-term value.
Mm-hmm.
So interestingly though, when Amazon bought Whole Foods, Kroger's market cap plummeted by about 20%.
Yeah.
So if you were in Kroger, how would you think about that?
Well, it plummeted because they knew that Amazon wasn't going to worry about the
Short-term
profit margins.
profitability, right.
Yeah, because that's what they do. So they knew they were going to attack. Kroger's was going to lose.
Right, each category they enter, they don't care about making money until later on when they've proven that they
Someday.
can dominate the category. Right.
Yeah.
So, Ellen, how do you think about great company culture? How do you create it? What are the characteristics of it?
We're lucky. We have a founder who truly cares about his people. I'm going to skip to my case study.
You're talking Sam?
Yeah, I'm going to skip to my case study because it sort of relates to that. Here's a page from his book, and he tells the story of my going to divinity school, and he introduces it by saying, and just like with my family, I want everyone to be happy, to love what they're doing, and I'll go the extra mile to make that happen. And those aren't just words. I mean, Sam, it's very important to him that his people are happy. He will do a fair amount of accommodations to people if they're performing to figure out how to let them do their job and do it well and be happy in their lives. And those aren't just words to us. I mean, there used to be a sign in our office that said, if it ain't fun, we don't do it. There's a little bit of truth to that. So Sam sets the culture, sets the tone, and it's carried down all the way through every one of us. Our summer interns even have to sort of embrace that. And occasionally
That's within
Equity Group.
Within the group.
So
but
Equity
you're
Group
buying
is-
companies that have existing cultures.
Okay, but remember, it starts. Equity Group isn't a little place. I mean, we have 70 employees.
Oh, I get it.
I would say we have 80
I get
employees.
it.
So
I get it.
we have a corporate culture where people are embracing that. People actually like going to work. We get to dress as we want. I actually sort of grumbled at Gregg because I'm like, you didn't tell me we could come in like casual clothes.
I'm dressed up right now. I don't know what you're talking about.
Because that is how I dress every day.
And my students have never seen me in a jacket, by the way.
So anyway, so it starts, right at Equity Group, and then, when we invest in a company, I mean, I've walked into companies where I didn't like the corporate culture. I went back and I said, Sam, I don't think these are our kind of people. I don't think that this is the kind of investment we should make. Now, it shows in other ways. I mean, if people aren't happy, I challenge you to find a company where people aren't happy at work and yet the performance is great. I think it all just ties back together.
So one characteristic
Although
is...
I heard Amazon is a horrible place to work.
Oh, is that right? Oh, that's interesting.
I could be wrong, but
No, I'm sure you're right.
They hire a lot of Michigan
place to work.
MBAs, so it's...
Jeff's never going to hire me.
They have a lot of Ross MBAs. They also have a lot of ex-McKinsey people there, so who knows?
We'll ask them. We'll survey them after.
So how many people here love where they work? Raise your hand.
Wow.
Oh, right on.
Yeah, right on.
Just wondering.
Well, but think about it though, because I'm assuming that every one of you, like none of you actually paid to be here, that your workplace paid for you to be here, which means that they're investing in you. I mean, how great is that? Am I wrong? I mean, is anybody here who paid for themselves? Okay, well, that's impressive, but look at all the people whose companies are investing in them. And if you want to drop your resumes off, there's a lot of people, sorry.
I mean,
happiness is one thing that makes a great culture. Are there other things?
But it's not
Blair,
happiness, it's being valued.
Yeah.
It's actually being valued. I don't think it's necessarily happiness.
Okay.
It's we value you as a human being. We value what's important to you. You tell us what's important to you, and we'll figure out how to accommodate it.
That's an important clarification.
Yeah.
Blair, you were about
Sorry,
to say
Blair.
something, and then I rudely cut you off.
No,
I think
it's
I
fine.
did.
I mean, I've been thinking a lot about the future of work and doing a lot of sort of research on it. And I mean, I think culture is going to be one of the key differentiators for companies to get the right talent. I mean, if you look at millennials, they change job every 4.6 years. I mean, this is like a fast pace. And so how do you capture their attention long enough to sustain them? And a lot of those things, it's partially about culture, but to this, do you feel valued? Can you go to divinity school? I mean, lifelong learning is going to be, and in-house training programs are going to be part and parcel to how companies have to retain their talent. And top talent is always hard to retain, but when people are moving so quickly. And so, I mean, two companies I love, a friend of mine started a company called Warby Parker, which you guys may have their glasses. I mean, Warby, they're a great company, and they have very specific values that they started with the 3 founders or 4 founders, and they're built into that company. You walk into their store, like you feel the Werby values. They have these cool, like every book is totally cool on the wall, and I mean it's just the whole energy, and people want to be a part of it. They want to build it. I also invest in a company called Havdala that trains software developers in Africa, recognizing that there's all this latent talent on the continent, and why can we not find the best technology developers in the world in Africa? So they've trained 700 developers in 3 years in Nigeria, Kenya, and Uganda, who work for companies here like Google and Facebook and Microsoft and medium-sized businesses. And they work in Lagos or Kampala, and they can get this talent because Lagos, Nigeria's 160 and 180 million people. No one actually knows. But in Lagos, there's a lot of, for the top talent, there's a lot of opportunities. But they have created this culture that just does not exist in that city. I mean, it's an open layout. You've got ongoing training. You have young people working together. They get to work globally. I mean, that is why they can go into some of these places and find the best talent. And so that is like one of the biggest the way that I think about the value of their company. It comes from how they can get the best talent and how they can build the right type of environment to retain them. So
And then value them for their talent.
And they're a people company. I mean, they're selling top talent. So it's critical.
But are we bending over too much and helping them so much that we're babying them, the new generation, or is that just expected of what we do today? I think I'll speak for my age, but I had to go get a job and work really hard and have people hopefully respect what I do. Like we've kind of flipped it a bit, and we're saying let's make that culture fit these people versus them fit this culture. So like, what's right and wrong? Are we
What do you
spending
think?
too much time?
What do you think?
I'm gonna throw it at Blair.
Well, I want to know what you both think.
I think it's my personal feelings. I think it's a super healthy time right now because I think people do need to love what they do and appreciate. I think we've moved up in a bit in places where we have enough food and safety and security. We've moved up Maslow's hierarchy of needs in some places of the world, not everywhere, of course. And those places that have moved up that ladder, which I think is the people we're talking about, they want more. They want to have a higher, sense of self earlier. They're not waiting until they're 60 years old and 50 and 40 and going back to Vinny's school or Penn. Like they're like, I want it now. And so I think you have to embrace that. That's my feeling. But I hear a lot of pushback from people that are like, why are we babying these people? Like this is ridiculous.
So how does that manifest itself in the pretzel business? How do you think about attracting, developing, retaining, exciting this group of people in your business?
Well, that's who our customers are because they're looking for products that speak to them and have something underneath it. It's not just something that fills me up at the time and I don't know what's in it.
So it's not just about building the culture in the company. It's also about the culture of how you appeal to your customers.
Well, it's just my co-founder and I here. So as we build our company, but I think the people that are going to be working for us are people that believe what we believe, which is this is a much better version of what a healthy snack can be, and it still tastes good. So, but we're worried more about who are our potential customers, and those are people that are demanding more from what they eat, just like they're demanding more from where they work.
But as your company
Can I
grows,
just
yeah,
jump
go
in
ahead.
one
Ellen.
second?
Go
Only
ahead.
because I know Gregg, and I'm going to throw him under the bus here a little bit.
Throw me.
So,
We're finally starting to have fun.
Well, you see, the thing is, we had this big call in the beginning, and Gregg and I were like just pouncing on each other. Now we're being very polite, so it's time. You like seem to disdain babying people, but you tell some fabulous stories of your artists and what you did personally. I don't know if you're willing to share them, but you're like the king of babyers.
Oh yeah. No,
I mean, I literally, he told me what he did for some of these, and I'm like, why didn't you just give them a swift kick in the backside and tell them to grow up? Which is what I would have done.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same way, I mean, part of why I'm not in the music business is I definitely probably babied them all too much. And so it's probably the same thing with what we're talking about. But no, yeah, I think it's a hard distinction of that fine line between, letting them figure things out for themselves, whether they're people that work for you or people that I managed, or helping them have a better time in it and trying to show them the light. And so what I'm trying to do now, I think with time and some experiences, help them become better versions of themselves so they don't have to go through some of the things that I went through in my life. I think that's the short answer.
So you're not going to give them any great examples?
No, I can't.
Damn. He's got some good stories.
Blair, what do you think about the shift in terms of what you have to think about? I mean, you talked about this amazing group of people in Lagos, et cetera, but how do you think about the shifting requirements for building a great culture with millennial versus, my old baby boomers? Being a 61-year-old baby boomer myself.
Yeah, I mean, I think work needs to be shaken up. Like, I think it's good that these traditional old corporations are like, oh my gosh, like I can't retain this great person, or the manager is like, wait, you're supposed to do what I had to do because I wasn't comfortable at that time. So I kind of think it's good. I mean, there's a couple other takes on culture that I also think are interesting. Because I'm interested in future of work, but more from this inclusive point of view, culture can also be a word for someone that's like me. And I create a culture where I hire people that look like me, I hire people that talk like me, that went to the schools like me. And what I think is interesting that's being shaken up a little bit is this question, when you can start to bring sort of different types of recruiting processes, particularly technology, into the process, and we can start to question even that understanding of what culture is and how we value it and how we create it. And I've been looking at a lot of companies. So for example, there's a company called Textio that screens job descriptions and looks at words that are off-putting to certain communities. So for example, women are more interested in a job description if it says you'll be, rather than saying you're going to be managing a team, it'll say you're building a team. And so there are all this language that comes in there that we've sort of defined, and that may be the culture of that organization that's sort of not aware that that's happening. Or, so I think there's interesting models or unconscious bias interviewing, or having different ways of, so I think culture there's a lot built into that, and so I thought I might just throw that out into this conversation because I think it's an interesting angle as we think about inclusivity and inclusive growth or, sort of social aspects of this too.
Now, how do you do that without going overboard and creating, too much safe space when maybe somebody needs a swift kick in the butt? How do you think about the balance between, wait a minute, we've got to get up and work a little harder here and get this thing fixed, versus creating this inclusive, positive, and place that feels great? And I'm looking at you, Ellen, because you brought up the kick people in the butt, and I just you work with.
When I'm talking about recruiting, I'm just talking about like people who otherwise would not have an opportunity to get in, who are going to be hard workers and perform, but have been excluded because they weren't like a cultural fit.
Yeah,
Okay.
It's tough though, Blair, because some jobs are so specific. So it's pretty self-selecting who's going to apply to be an investor with us. Mm-hmm. You have to have investing skills. We're not big enough that we can actually teach a young person how to run models. I mean, that's what investment banks do. And then we get it from investment banks. And so they've already sort of, cut the pool down to a very small number.
Sure.
So it becomes self-selecting. And I struggle with that because we think about inclusivity a lot, mm-hmm. We really would like to bring in people with differing views. As Sam always says, if he doesn't need a bunch of yes people around, because then why would he be paying them? I mean, so right. We like different perspectives. I'll tell you, it's trickier, and it's not language of how we're putting it out on job descriptions, because mm-hmm. what we do looks like, frankly, every other, our job descriptions, like every other private equity shop in the world, other than we do it in a really nice environment.
So what do you do to deal with the trickiness?
Trickiness meaning?
You said it's trickier.
We keep looking, we keep interviewing, but it's hard to find people that frankly don't look like us. And I don't just necessarily mean look like us from a background, Ivy League educated, worked in an investment bank, because those are the sort of tracks
Ivy
give
League.
you the skill.
We're at the University of Michigan here. This is better than the Ivy League.
Oh, sorry, oops.
Having gone here twice.
And it's a great school, and I love it. Go Blue.
Not getting a job.
I can't get hired by Sam, but that's for many other reasons. So let's do a quick round, and then we said we did want to open it up a little bit for Q&A,
Yeah.
but I'd like each of you've been telling a lot of positive stories. So, and we talked about having the case examples of experiences. I'd actually like each of you to pick one thing that you've kind of screwed up or struggled with. It doesn't have to be a complete disaster. I mean, I have a disaster. I started a motorcycle retailing business. Sam loves motorcycles. I started a motorcycle retailing business. We thought we were going to create this positive, wonderful culture that gave people full-time employment and benefits through the seasonality of a very seasonal business, and we could not get the right mix of a positive, wonderful working culture and the performance that we needed to actually survive. And we ended up selling off pieces of it and liquidating the rest. Complete, total failure as a business. One of my wonderful experiences as an entrepreneur. I've also had some successes. I won't talk about those, but it was a disaster, right? It was a disaster financially, and it did not create the sustained workplace for the people that we wanted to create. So that's an example of something I learned a lot from. Anybody want to put their hand up and talk about a challenge or a failure you've had?
Every time I've had something really bad happen to me, I've figured out how to make it a good thing, even if it takes 10 years.
So you've never failed?
Oh, I've failed, but I've turned it into something that gave me fuel for the next thing that I did.
Okay, so pick one of those and tell us about it.
I mean, being a CPA, and I hated it. I said I was never, ever, ever, ever going to be in that situation again. I was going to start a company, and it didn't matter how long it took or what I had to do. I was going to make it successful, and I did.
Okay.
But that knowing what I didn't want to ever do again is what was the fuel for make sure that I made it work.
Anything?
I'll share. It's not an entrepreneurial venture, but I think there's been so many times when I've been in rooms that were dominated by people who were very different than me, and I've sort of silenced myself in ways that, because it wasn't appropriate for me to say, well, why are you looking at that person rather than me when I asked the question, or it slowly, in certain rooms, started to wear me down, and I feel like there have been so many times when I could have spoke the truth or just inserted myself in the conversation, but the stakes felt so high because we were raising money or whatever it was, and I see that as a type of failure because I think that it just perpetuates a certain type of behavior that I think is not that then someone else is going to experience after I experienced it, because no one's sort of calling people out, and I'm still trying to figure out the right way that you can navigate that. But I think that's a failure that I continue to participate in, unfortunately. Not all the time, but
That's a tricky one. Because women, we understand. I think most women understand that.
Yeah.
Well, and I think men have a tendency to do what I'm doing right now, which is to dive in and then continue the suppression. And so we both
Suppression.
suppression or oppression.
I like oppression better.
Okay, that's a more
kidding.
extreme version of suppression.
I'm
I guess
kidding, I'm
I guess
kidding, I'm
oppression is
kidding.
continuous suppression. But
Yeah, but it is hard. My example was much more personal in the sense that I had a big failure. I invested in a company and we took it into bankruptcy. And when you have to look at your colleagues, one of the ways we build culture is it doesn't matter who does the deal. You invest the same percentage in every deal. It doesn't matter if Mark makes the investment or Kathleen makes the investment. It's the same percentage if I had made the investment. I took one of our companies into bankruptcy because, for a lot of reasons, including the fact that our management team probably wasn't fabulous, but commodity prices moved against us. And I got to tell you, it was really hard for me to, sort of have the confidence to go back and make another investment because, we're dealing with very big dollars. And even though, Sam was like, hey, we tried, we all made the investment, you got to pick yourself up and go forward. I'll tell you, it's hard. And I think, again, it's harder for women than men. Men are like, oh, it happened, let's go forward. I took it really personally.
lost that game, let's go play the next game versus, yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't quite ready to jump back and play the next game.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So we're going to open it up to Q&A. Where is the cube? Somebody got the cube up there? Can you toss it down and I'll start the cube?
Yeah, it's really cool.
We've got this fun thing where we toss the cube
Throwing
around.
it around. Really cool. Fun. Sam loved it. Oh, theirs has an M on it.
Yeah.
Once again, why Michigan's so great. Look at that. That is awesome.
And our sound guy, is the cube functional?
Should be.
Yeah.
That was invented by
Who has a question? Who would like to ask a question to the panel?
Yes.
Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
Oh, no.
And then you toss it back to me.
Hello, I hope you can hear me well.
Good stories.
Yeah, we
You
can
hear
hear
me?
you.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
So I work at a local company. It's a company called DeRue Security. We have a very positive culture. So we have being kinder than necessary. We have learning together. So these are two things that are part of our corporate values. So I've never worked in a firm that has such positive values is part of it. And it doesn't take away from our profitability or doing well. But sometimes we encounter things that just don't fit well with our worldview, right? There's political people out there. We don't see a lot of it in day-to-day, so sometimes you don't recognize that well. So have you seen companies that do that? Have they had to change from their positive ways in unexpected ways? What do you think?
So companies that have to change their culture because I didn't totally understand.
I think they want a clarification of your question.
Sure. So day to day, we expect that everybody is coming at it from something that's good for the company rather than from something that's good for their own department. So when we do budget planning, we don't see people getting into positions that suit their own departments rather than something that suits the whole company. So we don't see, frankly, interdepartment politics happening much. But in the odd occasion that it happens, we don't know how to deal with it.
So are you guys? It's private, I assume.
It is private, yes.
Do the employees have equity at all?
Yes.
So you guys all need to kind of be right. So I would think that would be the best because you're saying like everyone kind of has their own individual things happen sometimes. Is that?
So we're constantly hiring. So when I joined, we were 300. Now we're 600. So we're constantly hiring. There's chances that we bring in people that aren't fully subscribed to the vision that we have.
Right.
They aren't fully, as tightly held onto the qualities the values that we hold dear as the ones that have been here a while. So every now and then we see a bit of politics, and we don't know how to deal with it.
Let's touch. I need more details. It'll take too long. So as soon as it finishes, let's talk.
Yeah.
Any thoughts about that, or do we want to go on to another question?
I just think that understanding that every company has politics,
Yeah.
that's just sort of the way it is. That's why I was more surprised, when you said you sort of don't see politics. It's part of being an adult. You see it in your social realms. I see politics everywhere I go, and so it's a matter of just insisting that people treat one another with respect. Understanding that often people are going to act in their own self-interest, and trying to align their self-interest with the greater good is frankly the way to do it. It's why we make everybody invest the same percentage of dollars, of their personal dollars, in every deal, because I now have just as much incentive to make their deal work as I have my own. It's aligning incentives is, I think, the only way you can really have sort of quell the natural tendency to be political.
Well, and I think Spock told us the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the one, or something like that, and live long and prosper. Is there anybody else that would like to ask a question? Yeah.
So I'm curious, I think we are all counting on the Magnify students to 10, 20 years to be the CEOs we desperately need them to be. But right now, do you see a shortage of leaders that are able to do sort of the traditional, finance, strategy, operations, but now they're being asked to understand purpose and culture and all these other things? Or is there a great pool of leadership out there that can do that?
I just think it's to be a great leader, whether it was, I think, yes, it's more necessary today to think a little bit more, but you ask more from everyone today. So I just think it's a part of that role. If you're going to be, an executive or a president or CEO, you have to think more about just where you are. It's probably more demanding than it's ever been about making sure that everyone around them is being taken care of the way they need to be. So I just think it's part of the definition of being a leader in these companies today, private or public.
Blair, you deal with social impact investing. Mm-hmm. What about this question about leadership pool in what is a very difficult balancing act? How do you think about the question? Putting you on the spot.
Yeah, I think the greatest leaders, and we have many great corporate leaders right now, are all thinking about this question of how do I build a culture? And if you just look at any of the great corporations, they all have amazing cultures. Going way far back. And I think they just instill that, and then those values get played out over and over again in everything that they do, in small little actions that are constantly reinforcing that. The piece on I was just thinking as you asked the question, one of the things I'm interested in is that HR used to kind of be they did the benefits, and my dad was he worked at HR at Domino's, and so I think he did labor negotiations or something like that. But now, because of quote unquote people analytics, like now that we can really get incredible performance data on first on recruitment, but also performance, HR is like moving into the more significant kind of C-suite, I think, in a way that's like helping drive these conversations. And so I think what will happen is a lot of these CEOs are going to have like their HR talent, is I think now what we're calling it, or people analytics, with them in those big conversations. And I think that's going to start to shift a lot around how we think about culture, how we think about retention, and how we use data, which there are strengths and weaknesses to all the data we're going to have on people.
It's a fascinating observation. I mean, you think about the traditional HR transactional stuff around benefits administration, payroll, that kind of stuff. A lot of that's just outsourced anymore to companies that just do it efficiently. And now it's all about human capital management and thinking about talent and building the culture, and it becomes much more of a strategic function rather than, you know, a transactional function. It's a huge shift that's occurred.
But I would tell you, I think that the young talent that we're seeing is awesome. I mean, I see that, so we have 60 students that we graduate under the Zell, like they're directly Zell scholars every year among Israel, Kellogg, and Michigan. I got to tell you something. I mean, so many of these people are so much more advanced in terms of their skill sets, their intellect, their social awareness. I mean, they like if we were the same age, you know, with them, they'd eat our lunches. So I think that the young people now have just you know, unbelievable talent, and I'm so honored to like be able to work with them because I'm learning from them. So I know that they're going to be great. There are great CEOs among them that will.
So an optimistic answer to your question from the panel. I will say, just from my own personal experience teaching, after having been a consultant for 30 years, the opportunity to teach here, I'm not worried about the future.
Yep.
I'm worried a little bit about the present, but I'm not worried about the future. Right? I'm not going to get into politics. I think we have time for one more question. One more volunteer. There we go. I'm going to play Phil Donahue for those of you that are old like me. Here you go.
Worked so well.
So I would say this is more directed to Blair. You speak of socially responsible investments and that type of thing. So how do you keep, or do you even try to keep politics out of it? And when I say politics, I don't mean corporate politics. I mean, you know, national politics, left, right, that type of thing. I mean, who decides what's socially responsible? Those types of things. Do you keep that separate? The politics of it? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying.
And you've got
Just thinking of the answer.
and you've got 30 seconds to answer that question. No.
I have 4 minutes according to that countdown clock. You know, it's a good question. So maybe before this administration, I mean, it was actually interesting because social responsible investing kind of was in this unique position in between, because it was sort of like using market forces, if we just want to generalize, you know, using sort of conservative market forces, but to have a social good. So it was very, it was really embraced politically by both sides of the aisle, and I think still continues to be. I mean, even this administration like understands this sort of like, you know, how do we build businesses and use that as a tool for social change? I mean, you know, if you look at things like, so for example, if you don't really believe climate change exists or energy, there's not issues around certain, you know, CO2 emissions, whatever that is, then you're not going to give tax credits to renewable energy companies. So I mean, that's an issue because those companies are great companies to invest in that have the social impact, and so you can see politics playing, you know, a pretty important role there. But I mean, I would say, like, just I haven't really thought about this question in the way that you asked it, but I don't see it as a major issue in some cases. You know, as you think about this talent question that I've been talking about, or the future of work, I mean, there are these are things that governments are very interested in, and job creation, and so there's a lot of opportunities, I think, to use this type of investing as a good complement to government. And there's certain areas where politics hits it, but not a ton. But
Helen, Greg, do you have any thoughts?
I'm good.
With that, I think we do want to stay on schedule. I think we've arrived at about the 4:30 hour. So I want to just say thank you to Ellen, Greg, and Blair, and I'd like to give it up.
yes.
Yes, follow on. Well, we have another session going after this. And we have, come on up, our students are going to help with some moving. And it also gives me the opportunity to share with you a question I commonly get and my response. So I'm often asked, hey, you're at the university that has the Center for Positive Organizations. What is it like? Thinking, okay, is it real? Right? That's really the question. So let me tell you what it's been like. From before I was actually connected with the center, the thing I noticed the most was performance. And in our field, that's really about productivity. You know, it's about your CV, how big your CV is, how long it is, how much you've produced. That's what you'll notice if you go on the website. You'll see that there are a lot of academics who they've produced a lot of written material. However, once, I was working at the center and knowing what it's like, it's a whole different ballgame. I didn't necessarily notice, people were better at writing or producing or researching. They were better at people. And it really showed in the day-to-day interactions. And I can think of key moments when faculty really helped me out. It's called task enabling. They saw the potential that I had and were able to really make it happen. So it's really about taking that individual potential that someone has and that exists within each and every one of us right now and maximizing that, turning that into performance. That is the big difference. So thank you, students. Thanks for moving. Our last speaker is our fearless leader, Dean DeRue, who's come to talk about, I believe, how wonderful it is to lead wonderful faculty. Was that what you were going to talk about?
That's exactly what I'm going to talk about.
That's exactly what you're going to talk about. Yes. So please welcome Dean DeRue.
Excellent. Good afternoon. You having fun? Outstanding, outstanding. Amy, thank you very much. And to Amy Stewart, Angie, the entire team, the Magnify students, can we give them a big round of applause for putting this on? This is certainly a team effort, a collective effort. I was very impressed with your question and their response to your question when you projected that the Magnify students are going to be the CEOs of our future. Did you hear the amount of movement over here and the noise that was coming from? Oh my goodness, the expectations. It was that's fun to see. Let me begin with a couple of stories. The first story is related to the question that you asked there at the end in terms of the role of business in society and how that intersects with the public sector is at the core of your question. I had the privilege on Monday night of being in Detroit and engaging with an audience in Detroit that is both Republican, Democrat, all across the board, business, healthcare, public sector, private sector, all of the above. And the conversation that we had was, what is the role of business in society? And I firmly believe that, so the private sector makes up about 80% of our GDP. Government makes up about 19 to 20%, and NGOs, nonprofits make up the rest. And among the government side of that, the public sector side, the big three would be defense, Medicare, Medicaid, if you will. And so if we can't figure out how to leverage the private sector to create value for society, we got a real problem because that's 80% of our economic activity. And I firmly believe at my core that business can be the most powerful force on the planet for creating positive impact, positive change. And I don't mean that just in terms of social impact in the way that we often think about it in terms of sustainability and those sorts of things. And I believe that too. But I believe it also in terms of economic opportunity, job creation. And so whether you're on the right, whether you're on the left, where we find common ground is the fact that people need decent work. We need to be able to put food on the table. We need economic opportunity. We need a secure food system. We need education so that our kids have a better life and the generation of the present and the generation of tomorrow has opportunities. We need health care. Now, we could debate about how it's covered, how it's delivered, and all of that, and those are healthy debates. But at the end of the day, we need health care. And I firmly believe that business, the private sector, has a really important and fundamental role in providing those services. And if we can figure out financially self-sustaining ways to do that, meaning profitable ways to sustain that activity, we all benefit. I think that's a common ground that right and left can agree on. We can debate on how it gets done. But what I worry about in our present day, and honestly the past, is that we miss the common ground because we're so focused on arguing over here. So the conversation we had last night in Detroit really illuminated that, because you see people start to argue over here, but if you really have a substantive conversation, you can find that there's actually more similarity than there is difference in terms of what the role of business could be or maybe should be. So that's just an interesting aside. The second story is when I got home last night from another event, I had a call with the head of Disney in China. Does anybody know what the turnover rate, the attrition rate of the private sector is in China right now? 30-something percent. So it's about 35, 36%. So think about that for a moment. So that means every, 2.5 years or so, your entire organization is different. Right? So it's one of the most competitive, most fluid labor markets around the globe. Okay? And the question that was asked, and we've been working together for some time, is can we reduce that attrition rate? So in China, the challenge that a Disney would have is they can't pay what Alibaba does, or they can't pay what Tencent does, right? So Alibaba is the Amazon of Asia. Tencent's a big tech company, if you don't know. And these are the companies that global citizens or local Chinese, they want to work at. And if you're Disney trying to hire the best talent in these markets, it's really hard to attract talent. It's even harder to retain them because you'll have a Tencent, you'll have an Alibaba come in and double their salary and those sorts of things. And so Disney's in this market, and their turnover rate at one point was in the upper 30s. And it's really hard to sustain excellence, performance in that environment. And so the question is what do you do from a talent perspective? If you survey executives around the world, the thing that keeps executives up at night isn't the business strategy. You put enough smart, motivated people in a room, you'll figure that part out. What keeps executives up at night is talent and culture. And those two things are right in the same wheelhouse, right together, right? Is how do I build a culture that attracts great talent and retains that talent? And how do I develop my talent and retain them? And so in Disney in China, they've taken, in not that long a period of time, they've taken their turnover attrition rate from the upper 30s to 14%. Okay, upper 30s to 14%. So we were having a call last night to just check in and see how it was going. And the question is, what have they done? Right? The question is, what have they done? And what we're talking about, and what I'd like to share with you in the few minutes that I have with you today, is some principles by which we can think about the talent side of this, and it came up in the earlier panel. So what have they done? What they've realized is that there are a couple of basic human needs that pretty much everybody has that many organizations seem to forget or ignore. The first, the need to feel that my work matters. How many of you like to know that when you get up in the morning and you go to the office, the work you do that day matters? Yeah, everybody. Right? So in social science, it's called a need for significance, a need for impact, a need for meaning. Right? I need to know that the time I spend, the blood, sweat, and tears I spend, it matters. It's adding up to something bigger than me. Okay? So there's all kinds of ways in which we can express that. So that's one. Second, a need for belonging. What do I mean by that? A need to be part of a community, a family, right? An organization where everybody from the founder to the lower level staff, they care about each other, right? We call that a need for belonging. You can call that a culture, a community where people want to work together. They have each other, the support, etc. Okay? Does that matter to you all? Yeah, absolutely. Okay, absolutely. Thirdly, need for achievement. We all like to know, right, that we are achieving something special, right? Something that is extraordinary, right? We want to be part of something that's not only meaningful, but that is high achieving, excellence, that is performing, right? Because there's lots of things that have meaning, but we want to be part of a high performance organization. How many of you want to be part of something that is performing really, really well? Yeah. Somebody, I was walking down the hall the other day here going to my office, and somebody stopped me and they said, Scott, I just want you to know how fun it is to be part of an organization that's winning. It's like, cool. I didn't know we were winning, but it's great. Right? I love winning too, okay? Those three things, those are fundamental human needs that psychologists have known for decades. All Disney has done is figured out how to operationalize those in China, right? What they figured out is how to connect people, whether they're 22 years old or 62 years old, or where'd Jeff go, 61, okay? They figured out how to connect that person to a sense of purpose and meaning. They figured out how to build a community, right, that is built on a sense of caring for one another, okay, belonging. And they figured out how to celebrate achievement where everybody feels like they're winning. Those are the three things they've done. And how you do that in your organization, right, is going to look different than how Disney in China is doing it. It's different than how Michigan Ross is doing it. But those are the three things they're doing, okay? So if you ask me, Scott, what is the secret sauce to building a positive organization? I'm going to tell you there's no secret sauce, but here are the three things I would do. And those are the three. Now here's the thing that I really want to talk about this afternoon. How do you develop talent who have the character and the capabilities to lead organizations to do those three things? That's what I really want to talk about. Because what executives are telling us is what worries them at night is how do I develop the talent to do those things? Because Sam Zale can't be everywhere all the time. Right? Mark Schlissel at the University of Michigan, the president, can't be everywhere all of the time. So how do you build the talent? How do you develop the talent who can build, lead, manage an organization that has those three pillars or foundational elements as part of it? Now, in your mind, I want you to think about the most stereotypical training environment or higher educational environment that you can think of. Okay? The most stereotypical sort of education environment or training environment that you've been a part of. What does it look like? What does it feel like? Sterile? Passive. Who said passive? What do you mean by passive?
Experts up front, and you just open your head and they're dumping it.
You open up, let me dispel all of my wisdom for you, right? And you're taking copious notes, and then you're going to lose them 2 days later and never see them again, right? So it's very passive, making it very sterile. Okay, any others? Say again? One way. And which way? From me to you, right? Okay, and we can keep going to pick on higher ed, etc. Okay. Or training in your organizations, right? Okay. All right. Here's our vision of what we're trying to do at Michigan Ross to move the needle on that. Because I believe, and I had the privilege of working with a team of researchers for about 12 years before I had the privilege of becoming dean here at Michigan Ross, of doing research on how do you teach this fuzzy thing called leadership? Or how do you enable people to develop the skills to do those three things that I was talking about earlier? Purpose, community, celebrating need for achievement, those sort of things. How do you learn those things? And how do you think you learn those things? Do you think you learn it in a very passive way where you just, what was the way, open up your head and I just pour it in? Is that how you learn how to do that? No, how do you learn how to do that? Practice. What do you mean by practice?
You have to live it. You have to
All right, so I have to live it day in and day out till it becomes habit. And if I just have those experiences, is that sufficient? Necessary, but maybe insufficient. So what else do I need? All right, so you've put me in these experiences where now I have to live it, but what else do I need? Okay, so I've got to experiment with different ways, trying this way versus that way. And while I'm experimenting, in order to learn from those experiments, what do I need? Okay, I need some pretty robust feedback loop that gives me a sense of what's working, what's not working. Okay, now in those experiments, am I going to be successful in all of them? Okay, not at all. So I need feedback, I need experiments, and what else do I need? I need some sort of encouragement or support. Not encouragement of, it's going to be good, but support that helps me work through that. Okay, here's our vision for Michigan Ross and how we're doing this. I want every student who walks through our doors, and we've got over 4,000 of them that come through our doors every day. Well, not every day, September to May. Okay? I want every student who walks through our doors to have the opportunity to start real businesses, and not as an extracurricular. They can do that too. To start real businesses as a core part of their educational experience here. Start real businesses. I want them having the opportunity to invest real money in real assets. So we have more investment funds that our students are running than I believe any business school on the planet. Okay? So in the last 5 years, our students have started a little over 200 companies. Okay? In about 5 years. We've got these investment funds. Many of our students are interested in consulting of some sort, so like McKinsey and others. So what's the best way to learn how to consult? To do it. So this year we'll do about 200 consulting projects for companies all around the world. Okay, undergraduate, graduate, all of the above. Okay, and we're talking Facebook, Google, Amazon, fastest growing coffee chain in Tanzania, government of Vietnam, you name it. Okay. And then the latest thing we started doing is we started building businesses inside the business school. How many of you have ever been at Shinola? Yeah, so luxury goods, watches, leather goods, for some reason crazy bicycles. Anybody see the audio, the headphones that came out this holiday season? Yeah, you seen those? If you haven't, go to the shop down on Main Street and buy them, please. Because here's what nobody knows, or very few people know. The development of that product and the launch of that business, 24 Michigan students report to the head of audio, who reports to the CEO, who happens to be our alum, and they help run that business every day. And it's a course that they take. They help run the marketing, they help run the supply chain, they help run the digital e-commerce, they help run the back office finance and accounting. We are creating experiences that stretch them and challenge them in ways that force them to figure out, how do I build a sense of purpose and meaning? How do I build a community in a startup organization that started with literally 2 prototypes of headphones and is now an organization that is in with products in Shinola stores nationwide? Right? Startup to scale quickly. How do you build a sense of purpose? How do you build a community? How do you celebrate achievement? What we're doing, instead of having our students read about case studies that happened in the past, our students now are the case study. And then we're surrounding that with the feedback and the support systems that they need to develop. And so the challenge that I would ask all of you is in your organization, so we call this REAL, Ross Experiences and Action-Based Learning. Start, advise, invest, lead. On the lead side, our goal, when we launched this, deans across the country told me, you're nuts. That's how you know you're doing something right. They're like, you'll never be able to scale it, you'll never be able to create these, etc. And I said, watch. Our goal was to have 12 of them in 2 years. We started last summer. We have 8 up and running. Shinola is one of them. We've got a business that is getting ready to launch that does, for example, you want to talk about purpose and connecting our students to a sense of purpose and helping them understand how to build that sense of purpose. We've got a business that's getting ready to launch in partnership with the law school and another entity outside of the university that does job training and placement services for victims of human trafficking. Okay. We've got an affordable housing business in partnership with one of the nation's leading affordable housing developers. They're pretty good at developing the affordable housing development itself. The challenge is, how do you build the services around the affordable housing unit dental care, health care, education, mentorship, etc., to help elevate that community out of poverty. We're building a business, a sustainable business, that provides those services in their affordable housing developments that they will own the business, but our students get to help build it and actually manage it. Right? So the challenge, the question for you and all of your organizations is, how are you creating the opportunities to practice building positive organizations that are founded on a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging, and a sense of achievement together? That's the question. If you want to develop talent, if you stay up at night thinking about how am I developing talent who is going to build the positive organization of the future for my company or for my organization, the question you have to ask yourself is, what are the experiences I'm creating for them that give them the opportunity to practice doing those things, and then am I supporting them with the feedback and the support systems to enable them to learn from that? If you can figure that out, you'll take your attrition rate from 36% to 14%. In a highly competitive labor market, whether it's in China, the United States, et cetera. Right? And you'll create a pipeline of talent who has the character and the capabilities to be those leaders of positive organizations in the future that we in this room all long for, otherwise you would not be here. Right? Thank you for your time. Welcome to the Ross School if you haven't been here before. Thank you very much. This is my first ever Michigan Ross notebook.
So everybody, thank you so much for a wonderful day one to our conference. I hope you finished the day energized, educated, better connected than when you came in, and ready for a great evening as well. Before I talk about this evening, a reminder, tomorrow morning we start a little earlier. Breakfast is served at 7:30. And we'll begin the main session in here, back in this room at 8:30 tomorrow morning. So a little bit earlier start, 8:30 in the room, 7:30 for breakfast. Now at 6:15 this evening, so a little over an hour from now, we're going to walk together over to the museum. Now it will be open, there will be a strolling dinner, the exhibits will be open to you, we'll have some information on the displays.